Thanks very much for joining this afternoon. We're going to get right at it. We're going to talk about seed management. I'm going to share some results of some of the trials that we've been doing with AIM and a few other things in the last couple of years. Steve Watts is also going to talk to us a little bit about work he's been doing for us through the AIM program and particularly on physiological age and seed size. And then we have Jennifer Cameron from CFIA is going to join us and share a bit of an update on BRR and what they've been doing this past winter on sorting through BRR detections and how their process works. And then Mary Kay is going to give us some updates on sort of the post-harvest test for this year and the results that we've got back so far, as well as kind of doing a little bit of a review on biosecurity and cleaning and disinfection, and those, as well as sharing a few other resources that we have for those. So hopefully we'll be done in about, an hour and 15, hour and 20, something like that. As usual, if you have questions as we're going along, you can either use the text, the chat function, or you can take yourself off mute and ask your question when I'll try and stop for questions a few times, and Steve will do the same. And so I'd ask you, if you're not on mute right now, to have yourself set on mute, just so that we don't get background noise while we're going along. And this will be recorded so that people can watch it in the future, those that couldn't join us today. If anybody is online that is certified crop advisor and is looking for CEUs, send me your CCA number and I will put you on the list for that as well. There'll be, I think, 1.5 CEUs for today's session. So with that, I guess we'll get started. So first, we're going to talk a bit about best management practices for producing a quality seed crop. And going hand in hand with that, we're also going to talk about best management practices for handling and the cutting of seed. I mentioned we'll have this BRR update from Jennifer, and then Mary Kay is going to talk a bit about cleaning and disinfection and biosecurity. So what are some of the key attributes of a quality seed lot? Of course, free of disease is a big one. Sometimes we may first think about virus like PVY or leaf roll. Potato mop top virus is a virus we're starting to see a little bit more of in Canada. Particularly, I think we're starting to see a bit more of it over in New Brunswick. The reason why this is particularly interesting or particularly worth watching is because it's a vector for powdery scab. So that can be a challenge. Bacterial, so things like blackleg, soft rot, BRR, which we're going to talk about, common scab. These are all things that can be seed-borne and are most often seed-borne and brought from field to field and seed lot to seed lot on the seed. And then, of course, fungal. And I mean, this is just a few of the things that we deal with. On seed, a lot of us, we think about fusarium and fusarium dry rot, but, rhizoctonia, Pythium, silver scurf, late blight, these are all seed-borne funguses that will spread through seed. Another key attribute of a quality seed lot is having physiological age and maturity of the seed that matches your production system and matches your end use. Steve's going to talk about that a little bit more and some of the research we've been doing on that. Freedom from bruising, mechanical injury, and proper suberization. Of course, that's important for any handling of potatoes, but particularly for seed, and we'll go into that a little bit more as well. And managing the size profile of your seed, and so that comes down to reducing the amount of cutting that we need to do, and having a seed size profile that is a little more geared towards improving yields and minimizing expense. And we're going to go into that a little bit more too. But all of these things are more or less determined by the time you receive your seed. Maybe these ones, if you're doing the cutting, the bruising and the mechanical injury may be a bit within your control. physiological age, keeping the seed cool or warming it up once you receive it, that's a little bit in your control, but a lot of this is going to be heavily determined by the time you get your seed. So that means working with your seed supplier, not being surprised by the seed that you receive, and making sure that you've got a good relationship, that you're receiving high quality seed in the spring. One of these things that we're looking at here, oops, went too fast, is disease-free seed and PVY. So in particular on PVY, there's been some work in New Brunswick in the last 5 years or so that showed that the rate of PVY spread in a wheel track row could be anywhere from 2 to 7 times higher than in a non-traveled row. And this got us thinking a little bit about, particularly with some of the newer strains of PVY, do we need to be looking at our management and traffic in our seed fields a little bit? Is there the potential that those wheels on the sprayers could be moving infected sap from an infected plant to non-infected plants further down the row, those sorts of things? So we did a little trial last year on 3 fields where we wanted to see whether we could observe any increase in PVY in the wheel tracks versus those non-traveled rows. So we chose 3 commercial fields with susceptible varieties. 1 was Shepherdie and 2 were Mountain Gem. And then these fields had starting levels of PVY somewhere between 1.5% and 2.5%. So a little on the high side, below our 3% cap, of course, in PEI, but a little bit on the higher side. This is what we found. So you can see I've got the 3 fields here. In the Shepherdie field, we had 0 in our post-harvest test from the control rows, and we had 2% from the wheel track, but that's very much within the margin of error for sure. In this Mountain Gem field, we had 3% in the control and 2% in the wheel tracks. So again, negligible difference. In this Mountain Gem field in Western PEI, you'll see these numbers are huge, up to 38, 39% PVY that we found in the tubers. Not much difference between the control and the wheel tracks, but this started at closer to 2% in the planted. So that amount of PVY spread in season was dramatic. So we didn't really see a trend of increased PVY percentages in the sprayer tracks. All the fields used a self-propelled sprayer with the narrower tires and vine lifters. There was obviously, there was some damage to the plants. There was compaction from the sprayer tracks, that sort of thing. But we didn't see any difference on the actual PVY in the post-harvest test. Now, that may be due to some of the limitations of that trial in terms of, we didn't go ahead of time and observe plants with PVY symptoms. We didn't inoculate anything with PVY. So it wasn't really a controlled experiment. It's more of an observational trial. If we look at doing this another year, we may change this our experimental design up a little bit. But just from measuring a wheel track versus a non-wheel track, we didn't see a big difference in PVY in commercial fields. What we did see a difference on is yield. So, and this sort of tracks with what I think a lot of growers would know and acknowledge, is that there's usually a decline in yield in the wheel tracks. And it's not just a decline in marketable yield and quality, but there is a total yield loss as well. And what we saw is that despite some huge variability in yields, these 2 fields were in central PEI where it was extraordinarily dry and the yield was very much compromised. This field was in West Prince and had a tremendous yield and a tremendous field with, very, very few problems. But we still saw a similar yield reduction of somewhere between 10 and 13%, and then an average of 11.5% yield loss, which has a crop value of about $380 an acre. So just kind of giving you a little bit of that's the sort of the range of yield loss that we would generally see in those sprayer tracks versus a non-sprayer track. Any questions before I move on? So on our agronomy website, there is a PVY fact sheet, 2-page fact sheet on there, which we just did a couple of years ago with based on the research from Dr. Matresh Singh over in New Brunswick. And it's a good document that kind of gives an overview of some of the PVY work that was done in New Brunswick over the last, 7, 8, 9 years. And so it's a good resource. If you haven't read it already, I'd encourage you to go and look it up. One of the graphs in there that I think is useful to look at is comparing the amount of PVY spread by different types of programs. And really what's important to show is that the highest level of reduction in spread came with combinations of oil and insecticide. And there really wasn't a big difference whether it was high amount of oil or low amount of oil or 11 insecticides or 5 insecticides. It was more having the combination of the two. So this level of control between 55 and 60% was pretty much statistically even. And it's much better than the insecticide only down here and then sort of the oil only over here. Another good graph that I think is useful to look at. This is comparing fields, the amount of PVY spread on fields that were sprayed earlier, June 15th for the first spray versus 2 weeks later. And you can see there's almost double the amount of PVY spread just with 2 weeks later of that first spray. So take home message, it's really important to get your seed sprayed with oil early. Yesterday we talked a little bit about, what's the number. Somewhere around 30% emergence is probably a good time to start, and making sure that you've got coverage on those plants. So best management practices for keeping PVY levels low: plant the lowest PVY seed available, weekly application of at least 2 liters per acre of mineral oil, shortly, as soon as after emergence as possible. There's some recent evidence that shows that most PVY spread happens in the first half of the season. So it's less important to keep oils on right to the end of the season, but incredibly important to get them on in the first, say the first 2 months of the season. For susceptible varieties like Shepedy or Mountain Gem, maybe that's a variety that you consider delaying planting slightly to avoid early season aphids, just because that those are varieties that are particularly susceptible to PVY. Of course, early roguing and getting those infected plants out as early as you can. Isolation, it's harder to do in PEI, but the more that your seed can be isolated from other commercial crops, the better your chances of minimizing PVY spread. And then border crops, crops around the borders of your fields, at edges of your fields that maybe attract aphids away, keep aphids off your potato plants. There's been quite a bit of research done on this over the years, and a lot of high gen seed farms do this. It might be more of a consideration for your farm as well. One thing I wanted to talk a little bit about today is blackleg. Blackleg is something that is becoming more and more of an issue. Oh wait, I have something in the chat. I'm going to check that here. Oh no, we're good. So blackleg is seemingly becoming more of an issue, and particularly on certain varieties. And so we've had some issues with Dakota Russet lately. Lamoka, which is a chip variety, seem to have some real struggles or some real susceptibilities to blackleg. And unlike in the past, a lot of blackleg, you'd have poor emergence, or you'd notice it after emergence, and then those plants would just die and they wouldn't set tubers, and it wouldn't really be a problem most of the time on potatoes going into the storage. Now we're seeing an awful lot more of this. We're seeing a lot more potatoes that are going into storage that are compromised and start to break down in storage, and then those storages need to get moved quicker than you'd like, and you've got rot loss due to tuber rot, and that's something we really want to try and minimize as much as possible. Why are we seeing that now maybe more than others? A big part of it is a changing profile in the bacterial species which cause blackleg, as well as changing weather patterns. So there was a good presentation last week by Steve Johnson from Maine, and he was talking a little bit about this new aggressive blackleg species called Pectobacterium parmentieri. And this is becoming more and more prevalent, this species of blackleg. And compared to the old blackleg, as they would call it, which is Pectobacterium atrosepticum, it seems to be more aggressive on tubers. It doesn't show up maybe until a little later in season, and it spreads very easily through cutting and handling of seed, extremely easily through cutting and handling of seed. So they've done some research in Maine and North Dakota and a few other places, and they've been able to show that, you know, traditional blackleg will spread through cutting, but not too bad. Dickia, which we were really worried about here 3 or 4 years ago, doesn't seem to be dispersed, or doesn't seem to be spread through cutting very much. However, this Pectobacterium parmentieri does. And so trying, you know, even just a little bit of seed, or a little bit of blackleg in your seed could spread it to a lot more tubers. There's also some preliminary research in the United Kingdom, which may link blackleg spread to fields with very high nematode numbers. This is something we're going to keep a watch on as well. But if you have a high inoculum of blackleg in your seed and high nematode numbers, that might be helping to spread blackleg as well. So the number one management tool for blackleg and all soft rot is clean seed, and having as clean a seed as possible. Number two, of course, is proper seed and handling and cutting, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. Other pathogens, of course, seed should be free from common scab, silver scurf, fusarium, rhizoctonia. If you see any of those issues on your seed, you should be ditching those tubers, grading out severely compromised tubers as much as possible. Pay attention to the quality of your seed before cutting so that you don't multiply that through your seed lot. Clean and disinfect between seed lots. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later. And if you're having emergence issues or you have evidence of seed piece decay and you're not exactly sure what's going on, be sure to take a sample and send it to the plant pathology lab here in Charlottetown, because they can help you determine what exactly is the cause of your emergence issue, what's the cause of the rot issue, and whether that needs to be further addressed another year in terms of where you're getting your seed from or how your seed treatments, those sorts of things. Jonathan, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why common scab is on that list of things that the seed should be ditched for. What are you basing that on?
There is research that heavy infestation of common scab can carry the scab bacteria from field to field. So, every tuber that's got a little bit of scab on it, are you going to ditch it? Probably not. But tubers that are particularly coated in common scab can be, well, first off, they're probably going to have some issues with eye emergence, and they probably have some compromised eyes, that sorts of things. But also they can carry common scab from year to year, from field to field.
Yeah, the CFIA allows 10%.
Yep.
Scab on potatoes, so you wouldn't be ditching anything less than that.
Right. Any other questions? Okay. Talking a little bit about seed cutter disinfection. So I got some photos from Craig McCluskey at Bluefield Acres. Craig took some photos of his seed cutter disinfection unit that he put on last season and that he's quite happy with, and I thought I would share with you. So again, this is about keeping disinfection on the cutting knives in the cutter more frequently. And what he has is he's got 3 booms with flat fan nozzles here, and they spray for 10 seconds every 4 minutes when the cutter is running. So every 4 minutes, it'll spray directly on the knives for 10 seconds and then shut off again. And he's got a bar here in front of the knives, another one pointing down at the knives from on the top here, and then another one pointing underneath at the knives down here on the back of the roller. And this is the tank that comes with it for the disinfectant and the pump. Ken Lingley here in PEI has sold several of these units to people in the last year or so. He's charging somewhere around $2,500 a unit for the cost of the sprayer bars and all the equipment that you see here. That's not including the installation cost, so that would be your time. But I was told it's fairly simple to install yourself. But that gives you an idea of if that's something that you want to rig up on your cutter for adding that extra layer of disinfection, particularly for blackleg and soft rot. That's something to consider. Any questions about that? Okay, seeing none, we'll keep going. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve. Steve's going to talk a bit about physiological age of seed and some of the work that we've been doing on that. And then we'll talk a little bit more about size profile on seed as well. So I'll just go over and give Steve the
Good afternoon, everybody. So Ryan asked me to share some information with you related to some of the research trials that Genesis Crop Systems has been doing for AIMS for the last number of years. Predominantly these, a lot of them are related to physiological age of seed. I think before we jump into it, it's important just to remind everybody what physiological age of seed means. It's a fairly broad term that's used in the case of potatoes to relate to the amount of respiration that any particular tuber has experienced. So, and this respiration, for the most part, is predominantly driven by temperature. Although anything that causes stress to the potato, to the seed potato, increases the physiological age too. Generally speaking, older age seed has more stems per plant, will break through the ground quicker, will have more tubers per plant, and generally will die earlier. And vice versa, younger seed, fewer stems per plant, fewer tubers, a little slower to emerge, but I've found in a number of cases that if you have younger seed, relatively speaking, if you get into some of the stressful growing conditions that unfortunately we're experiencing more often than not here lately in various parts of PEI, the seed usually has a little more giddy up to carry the plants through some of those stressful situations. Important with physiological age, for the most of the time we can't turn the clock back. We can make young seed older pretty easily, and sometimes we do it not by design but just by management and stuff. But we can't make old seed younger, with the exception, I pointed this out yesterday, in the US there's a product called Rejuvenate that some growers will use, which will actually reduce stem numbers in certain applications. Unfortunately, that variety, I don't even think it's been evaluated any place in Canada to my knowledge, but so there is one very slight exception to the rule. When we're thinking about physiological age in seed though, you know, in some cases we want to keep seed as young as possible, as long as possible, and an example of that here in PEI is Russet Burbank and Ranger. I don't know if Clearwater necessarily belongs there yet, but we're going to learn more about it. Where there's others we may want to put some age on, and here in the case we're talking about for Isaac, Prospect, and Dakota, and Payette. Some of the recent work we're doing now, and this is stuff that both myself with Genesis and Newton Urinori at Cavendish Farms have talked about and initiated some research the last few years. Can we manipulate physiological age during seed storage to influence the resulting crop, i.e. varieties that are sluggish to emerge, like the ones I noted there earlier, like Dakotas and Prospects, Payettes? can we actually add some age to them to help them break ground faster and ultimately make more yield, but not necessarily. There's other attributes associated with quicker emergence and quicker row closure, and in that I mean mostly better weed control and better temperature and moisture moderation within the hill. On the other extreme, can we keep the seed a little cooler for a little later, closer to planting? I'm not saying we're going to take seed right out of a reefer storage and put it through the cutter, but maybe mind our P's and Q's on it and keep it as cool as we can, as long as we can, until it comes the time that we have to handle it. So the first series of trials I'm going to refer to involve modifying physiological age. These started actually a few years ago, where we were looking at keeping russet Burbank and Ranger seed cooler longer into the spring, you know, before planting, and we saw favorable results to that. So these newer series of trials, although we're continuing to look at a little extended refrigeration season on some varieties, we're also become more interested in saying, okay, what happens if we add some temperature to the seed during the storage phase? What happens to it when we plant it beside potatoes that have been stored in a conventional fashion? So the nature of how these trials were set up, there's a couple locations, one in the far west, one closer to the far east. We looked at warming up 5 varieties: Dakota, Clearwater, Prospect, Mountain Gem, and Payette. And we also held 2 varieties cooler longer, Russet Burbank and Alverstone Russet. The way we warmed up the seed, this seed was all stored under conventional storage protocol at Jonathan McLennan's in West Cape. Basically, the storage target in his building's around 38, 39 degrees Fahrenheit. So what we did in December of 2020, we took samples of those top 5 varieties out, and he moved them to his basement for almost a couple weeks, where it was about 15 degrees Celsius. Sorry for translating back and forth. And we kept them there for a few days, and then we put them back into the cold storage. Kind of the notion on this winter warm-up of seed is to do it when the seed is still in a dormant stage. If you were to do that, you know, right now, for example, by the time you get the seed back in, dormancy is broken for most varieties, and it's just going to start sprouting like crazy every chance it gets. On the other side, the refrigerated side, the seed come out of the ground in the fall of 2019. The refrigerated samples were moved right into a refrigerated compartment at Cavendish Farms Research in Freetown, and they stayed right there till almost about 10 to 14 days prior to planting last spring, whereas their conventional counterparts, once again, were stored at Jonathan's conventional storage. We had temperature loggers following all these seed lots around, so just the math on it, the seed we warmed up compared to conventional, we added the equivalent of 145 degree days to it, so it was 145 degree days older, and the refrigerated seed that spent the majority of its storage in the refrigerated unit, we actually had 223 fewer degree days, sorry, than the conventional storage. These potatoes were all cut by hand and planted by hand in small-scale replicated plots at the 2 respective farms, and everything else within the plot management was identical. Evan McDonald flew a drone over the sites on a couple different occasions. I'll zoom in a little bit here, perhaps. And with the normal HD camera and some software that he was working with, he could actually identify these plots are single rows by 15 feet long. So Evan was able to get some pretty good high-def photography on them. And he could use that software to calculate what kind of ground cover we had at any particular time. So if you get a chance to look at this slide later when you have more time to sit and think about it, some of the varieties where they were winter warmed actually broke ground a little quicker and did aim towards that quicker full row closure status that I mentioned earlier a little faster. some good extremes here. If you look in the middle there, Payette Russet's pretty bare. It's a real sleepy critter after planting here in PEI, the way it's being treated now, and you compare it maybe with Russet Burbank or Alverstone below it, they're quite a difference. And depending on the time of year, I've seen Burbanks break ground here in PEI in 10 to 12 days, you know, planted say after the 7th day of June. I would say on average, Burbank would beat Payette through the ground by at least 8 to 10 days in most years here in PEI. So if we can figure out how to get Payette through the ground a little faster, I think there's probably opportunity to see better yields with it as well. So here's the marketable yield bars from this series of trials. These are predominantly from one site. We had some data issues with the other. But just to explain, any bar that's in red is from conventional storage. The blue bars were winter warmed, and then over on the right, the green bars were actually the refrigerated treatments. So going from left to right, Dakota Russet's the first variety we look at. Dakota, numerically at least, was a little less yield reduction where we warmed the seed up. Dakota actually was one of the varieties that broke ground a little faster where we warmed it up, but in this case, it did not translate into better yields at the time. Clearwater's the next variety, same, you know, similar response to Dakota. Prospect, not a whole lot of difference between the two. Mountain Gem was a variety, though, that really seemed to respond to the winter warming in 2020, and it'll be interesting to see if we can repeat that here in 2021. Payette Russet, not a whole lot of difference. Alverstone, where we kept it refrigerated, actually had significantly less marketable yield than conventional storage. And Russet Burbank, numbers are getting close to being statistically significant difference. But, you know, a lot of the work, and I referenced this earlier, Russet Burbank seems to respond to keeping it cooler a little longer here under air conditions with some of the stressful growing seasons that our seed crops have experienced in recent years. On the economic crop value, so I guess I didn't mention it earlier, but these potatoes were all hand cut and hand planted, so the yields and the crop values I'm presenting here today would normally be considered to be higher than what most growers would experience in adjacent rows to these plots. These are 15-foot plots. We do a mathematical conversion of all the weight we get times 9.6, converts it into the 100 weight per acre. And then we take those values and assign period 3A contract values to them. So the contract value conversion is okay, but our reported yields are, you know, being realistic, are probably anywhere from 10 to 20% higher than what was really in the field. But for all intents and purposes, the crop value, you could almost lay this graph right over the marketable yield graph, and there wouldn't be too much variation amongst them. But the ones that caught our eye really this year, on our treatment side anyway, was what happens when you warm up Mountain Gem, and it showed a big difference in crop value. And we're not inferring that a lot of people are going to start refrigerating their Alverstone later, or I don't think they will. But it's going to be interesting. We're not going to get a chance to do it in 2021, but it'd be interesting to winter warm Alverstone up in another year to see if we can get it to behave somewhat like the Mountain Gem behaved. And then on the far right, once again, Burbank, where we warmed it up, showed an interesting. I think the numerical value is around $300 an acre or so, and it's just kissing on the edge of statistically significant for those that pay attention to stats. So kind of the summary from the warm-up in 1 year on air data, and I talked to Newton yesterday actually, and his data is very similar to this, where he warmed up a number of the same varieties. Mountain Gem showed a good response to the winter warm-up exercise, about 40 hundredweight per acre, and that translated to increased crop value. The other varieties, for the most part, there wasn't much difference, and you know, winter warming is not something you're going to do for much difference. It's going to have to be a big difference because it's not necessarily going to be an easy process. Even though we saw slight increases in emergence for winter warmed. On the refrigerated side, the conventional Alverstone, as I said earlier, provided 50 bags better than the refrigerated, and that translated into over $600 an acre in extra revenue from the conventional, sorry. And the Burbank, I said earlier, 3,300 weight and $260 an acre. Any questions on that, Ryan, before we jump to the next? Where do we go? All good. Okay. So looking ahead to 2021, once again, all of those varieties we hit repeat back in October of 2020. So we're all set up to do the exact same thing again in 2021. Other than note, we added a few more growing degree days to the winter warm treatment to see if 140 issues is enough or we need to be more. So I guess you know, some of the other physiological age stuff we're doing revolved around using small hole seed or getting closer to using more small hole seed anyhow. And the first thing we did, and these were the first series of trials that I did for Ames, was based on looking at pulling round potatoes out of existing seed lots and comparing them with cut seed from the same seed lot, and at the very least getting better stem uniformity as you go up and down the row within any of those seed treatments or sizes. So we did that back a few years ago, predominantly with russet Burbank. I know, you know, if you polled people out around the PEI industry, you get mixed reactions when it comes time to talk about planting non-cut seed, but I think people are interested in getting closer to it. Sorry. In the last couple of years as well, part of my activities with Ames has been providing what we'll call a seed coaching program, I guess, with a couple seed growers here on the island, trying to identify ways, you know, if the customer starts requiring or requesting smaller size seed runs, what are some of the things we might be able to do to help meet those requirements. So we did some work that I'll talk about here on nitrogen cutting time and spacing. But back to the projects with the small hole seed and russet Burbank, we had a couple of years looking at various types of Burbank seed. These were all pulled out of the same, or a number of seed lots, but the treatments were all the same. The shots on the tailboard there just to demonstrate different sizes. So the seed on the left is 1.5 ounce and down round seed. The second pile is 1.5 to 2.5 ounce small hole, we called it. The next one is 2.5 to 4 ounce, we would call large hole. And then on the right would be the hand cut seed that we compared it with. And on the average, that hand cut seed is 2.3 ounce. And I would think if I was to compare that to what most people are trying to do with their cutters, that's probably not too far away, except my seed didn't have any chats or pickles or anything like that in it. It was all nice blocky seed. So we had this seed at a couple or 3 different locations during the trial program. That's how it was set up. For each of the whole size seed categories, the small and the large, we actually looked at 2 different seed spacings. Agronomically speaking, the larger the size of the whole seed you plant, the farther apart you need to plant it. I know that's a bit of a surprise for some people that are watching, maybe, because I know past years, you know, especially with European planters, if somebody's going to plant round seed, that run to the machine shop and get a new set of sprockets made to get it out to 18 inches apart or so. If you look at what they're doing in Western Europe, who are, you know, it's a status quo in many, many areas there. The size of the seed determines how far apart you plant it in row, and the smaller seed is actually planted closer together than the bigger seed because it does not have the same amount of stem and tuber potential per plant as the larger seed does. So in the cases of what we did, the cut seed was all planted 15 inches in row. We planted the small at either 12 or 15 inches and the large at 15 or 18. Here's what we saw from the various plots over 2 years. We use a baseline of 0 for the cut seed, and then we say, okay, where we planted the small hole at 12 inches, we had an increase in dollars of $41 per acre. That's not a significant difference, but one of the challenges, I guess, associated with round seed, we've never, I don't think anybody can provide a real honest to goodness number what it costs to handle seed, to cut seed, to treat seed, the potential skips and doubles in the field when you're using cut seed, the potential issues associated with, you know, fusarium resistant strains in the past that could take 10, 20, 30, or 40% even of a plant stand away from the program. So those are all things you would expect less of when you're not cutting seed. But one of the things we want to identify here, when you take this certain size seed, if you space it farther apart, you'll actually have a yield and an income penalty. So where the small hole seed at 12 inches got us another $41 an acre over the cut, when we spread it out to 15 inches, we actually lost a few bucks per acre. And as I said earlier, that's predominantly due to A, not enough stems and tubers on that acre to hit the target. It's a similar story with the large hole, but the large hole and these bigger size tubers, 2.5 to 4 ounce, they are horsepower type tubers that will make you the highest yield per acre in your field if you were ever to sort them out and plant them separately. Where we put the large hole in at 15 inches, got us a couple $100 extra an acre, and at 18 inches, it was still a pretty good number, but less improvement than the 15 inch. One thing you'll notice here, we had more smalls with the round seed than with the cut seed, and we had less 10 ounce with the round seed and the cut seed. And that's primarily due to more uniform stem numbers as you would look down the row in any of these round seed treatments versus cut seed treatments. So the take home after a couple of years of this investigation with round seed versus cut seed, we get the same or better total yield. Obviously, our objective should always be better. Remember that earlier that those seed lots that we used were not grown for small hole seed production. They were just pulled out of existing seed lots, and we have no way to determine why the small tubers were small. As we morph into finding ways to grow more smaller potatoes in our seed run, though, by design, then I think we can get further spread in these numbers. The other thing I need to point out once again is that these trials were put in with hand-cut seed and hand-planted seed, and anybody that's ever planted properly sized round seed in the past, I think would agree that your planter will do a much nicer job planting those round tubers than it will planting machine cut seed. So like I said, we had a few more smalls, not a big deal. We had a few less large, not a big deal. We had the same or better total crop value, and the larger size of the whole seed produced better than the smalls or sized or the cut. And I think whether it's cut seed or round seed, generally the bigger the seed piece, the more productive your plant's going to be. There's some work that Ryan pulled off. Mark Pavick was here a year and a bit ago at the Potato Expo, and he talked about various things, but this is some work he did with cut seed. We don't know what sizes of tubers he used for the whole seed. It just says whole seed, so it's a generic term. But in his case, comparing whole to cut, there's no differences in the return per acre, the total yield. Once again, his smalls went up. Or sorry, no, that's his over 6 ounce went up a bit. Sorry. His number of tubers per plant on average were up a bit, or down a bit, and his weight was up. And his weight per plant, there was no difference. So once again, this stuff was cut by hand and not by machine. So machine cut would show probably different results. And if you could extend it into actually using commercial planters to plant it, it probably extended into some more differences as well. So first point I mentioned, a normal run of seed, you know, 1.5 to 10 is still a common agreed upon size in a lot of cases. You'll get a lot of variability in seed piece size at the end of the cutter, and you'll get a lot of variability in your stem number per plant as you walk down the row after the crop's planted. Size of the seed piece and consistency of the size has more of an impact than anything else. And I've got a term I use called prime seed. So to me, a prime size seed is less than 7 ounce. That would allow you to plant the majority of your potatoes with round seed, and then anything from a 4 to 7 ounce, you'd cut at once. So I think there'd be lots of attributes there. And as I move into the next section here, I'll be referring to prime size seed in a couple places. Generally, you know, if you're planting, obviously we'd like all of the soils to be at target on the day of planting, but realistically we know that never happens. So if you are looking at segregating your seed into whole or round seed and cut seed, it would be strategic that you could plant the whole seed a little earlier. It will handle cooler ground temperatures a little bit better. Most of the people I know that are planting whole seed are not using a lot of fungicide on it. They'll still treat it with an insecticide. So, as I said earlier, doing a little bit of seed coaching with a couple farms on the island. One of the things, you know, as we talk about seed production here in PEI, a lot of the times, as far as the agronomy goes, most seed growers are, you know, they're probably using a little less nitrogen fertilizer than their commercial neighbors, and they're probably tightening things up a little bit compared to their commercial neighbors. But those would be the two big differences, other than, you know, having the crop entered for inspection and following all the CFIA seed rules and stuff. One of the things we've observed over a lot of years of trials is we don't believe we need to be using as much nitrogen for growing seed potatoes as we're using for the commercial crop. And we've got all kinds of data, both, you'll see some of it today, and there's all kinds of background data that supports that comment as well. So what we wanted to do, we wanted to work with at least one grower here to see if we could reduce their total nitrogen load on the seed crop and what impact it would have on yields, not only total yield, but prime size seed yield as well. And I'll maintain that most people that are growing seed, at least I hope they're getting a lot more money for their seed size profile than they are for their oversize majority of the time. So this trial was set up 2019. I'm not going to tell you what the starting nitrogen rate was on these two varieties, but I'll tell you that we reduced the nitrogen rate by 40 pounds to the acre for Russet Burbank and 22 pounds to the acre for Shepherdie. In this case, you can see the spacings there at 7.5 and 10 inches respectively for the two varieties. Excuse me. We noticed, you know, mid-season and on, you could see a pretty well-defined line between the nitrogen treatments, the low end and the higher end. And interestingly enough, at a late season tour with the grower, we're looking at the high end, and the comment was, "Well, I'm going to have to snap these potatoes with boron pretty soon to get them shut down." Whereas the lower end side of the field was doing it, I'm going to say, in a more naturally fashion, okay? Because we were still higher than what I thought the nitrogen should be, but we take this program one step at a time instead of going crazy with big crazy changes. So in the case of these two fields in 2019, if we look at the prime seed column here, Shepherdie low end versus high end, we actually had a few more tubers, a few more hundredweight in the prime size with low end than high. And Russet Burbank, we actually, the spread was a little greater than that. If we look over at the total yield on 100 weight per acre, Shepherdie, the high end, gave us more 100 weight per acre, but notice that about half of that or so was in stuff over 10 ounce. If you were lucky enough to pull those out of your run at harvest time and get them off to do something with, they've got some value. They have a lot less value in my mind pulling them out of a seed bin in April or May and trying to move them into a market that probably doesn't really want them most of the time. On Burbank, we didn't have a lot of 10 ounce with that 10-inch spacing, but we ended up with more total yield than with the low end than the high end. So at the very least, the take home was that we grew similar, if not better, crops by shaving 40 pounds of nitrogen fertilizer off the program for Burbank, half of that for Shepparton. I can't tell you what that means in dollars per acre in that case. We didn't follow up. So we repeated the trial with the same grow in 2020. We added a couple varieties to it, and we did keep closer notes. And these are ranges here, but the grower had already, made some changes to their nitrogen program based on what we learned in 2019. So in 2020, we still had a nitrogen reduction by acres of 33 to 57 pounds per acre, depending on the field and the variety. We reduced the potassium as well, and that's not part of a seed strategy. That was just basically following the soil test potassium values and building a reasonable program based on having that soil test information. But at the bottom, at the end of the day, once again, we had a cost savings in fertilizer, in this case around 50 or a few dollars more per acre. So here's the results from our 2020 work. Here's our prime column. Here's Shepparton. We had numerically 2,600 weight to the acre of prime size seed, better with low end than high end, and we had higher total yields actually in this case from the low end than the high end. With russet Burbank, and these yields are pretty good. Both of these fields are east of Sonier, and I know it'll make some people in the central part of the island envious seeing these numbers, but east of Sonier had some strategic rains that translated in some pretty nice yields. Prime size on Burbank here, we were somewhat better on low end than high end, and the same thing with total yield. So I guess the take home once again is we were able to demonstrate in these two varieties that we could have similar or better yields using less nitrogen fertilizer compared to what the grower was using when we started. Here's a couple other varieties, Payette, Russet. Not much difference in the prime seed, and no difference in the total yield. And Mountain Gem, we actually had a little higher numerical numbers in the Mountain Gem. Can't explain why, but our total yields were still similar. Some of the other work we did, and we'll stop for questions here in a minute if there's any, but we also looked at pre-cutting seed. Depending on your farm enterprise, your access to management and stuff and space, I like the notion of pre-cutting potatoes, especially for seed production. It lets you get an important job out of the way before you get crazy busy trying to do other things. This is what we saw with the Dakota Russet variety. The blue bars are pre-cut, the red bars are fresh. We saw a slight improvement in total yield and in prime size seed yield with the pre-cut. The other varieties I'm not showing them, but the numbers are fairly similar to these numbers. And basically the take home here is there's certainly no disadvantage to pre-cut the seed. Get it down and get it suberized, and then when you plant that pre-cut seed piece, it'll behave very similarly to a round potato as far as disease and emergence and stuff goes. Seed spacing, we also did a little bit of work with seed spacing. 3 varieties here. The blue bar is 6 inches. The orange bar is 8. None of these varieties, I would call them real big toppy varieties, say compared to a Burbank or an Alverstone or some of the others that are out there. And I question, we can only stuff so many seed pieces in the row on a 36-inch row, and then the benefit's going to fall away on us. But I think we really need to be considering, especially on seed farms, but there's no reason we can't do it on any type of farm, is tightening that up to at least 34-inch rows. And some of you would have seen Mark Pavick's presentation a week or two ago. If you can't, I think it's still available online, where he's doing some work out in Washington State, even coming in as close as 28-inch rows I think most of us can get to 34s without too many major investments in equipment. Once we go beyond that, though, you're really looking at a new retrofit for your windrowers and other stuff. So that's all I have, Ryan. I don't know if there's any questions up or anything we'll try to deal with.
Yeah, we'll stop for questions. Anybody have any questions on anything that Steve shared there? Don't be shy, folks. We're ahead of schedule, so raise your hand or take yourself off mute if you got a question. Okay. So seeing none, you can add them in at the end too, or put them in the chat box. Yeah, nobody in the chat box right now, I don't think. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about a couple other things. So one tool that I know there are several growers in PEI use for managing seed size is gibberellic acid. So gibberellic acid is a natural hormone that's in all plants, but it's adding it at very small amounts has been proven to be useful for breaking dormancy, stimulating more eyes to sprout, stimulating stem number and tuber number per plant, and in some cases possibly increasing emergence rate. They're most available here. This Falgrow product here on the side, it's registered for use in potatoes. And one tablet has 1 gram of gibberellic acid in it, does 1,300 and 4,500 weight of seed. So you can see you're not using very much. The cost per acre is incredibly low. It's like 4 cents an acre or something like that. So it's really quite cheap. And if you're looking for an option to increase tuber numbers, particularly maybe on a variety that struggles with tuber numbers or that the size profile is a little bigger. So I'm thinking things like Prospect or Shepherdie might be an option to look at for those. There was a presentation in Ontario last week on the use of gibberellic acid on some chip varieties, which was quite useful, and that is available online too if anybody's interested in looking it up. So in summary, what's our toolbox for producing a smaller run of seed without sacrificing overall yield? Because that's really a lot of what we've been trying to focus some of these trials on, is how do we get a run of seed that you can hopefully cut less, but that isn't lowering the amount of seed that the seed grower is able to produce in a year. And so it's things like warming the seed up before planting and manipulating that physiological age, dialing back the nitrogen, optimizing the in-row spacing to the size of your seed. Consider planting your whole seed separately. If you have the ability to size out your whole seed and plant it separately, hopefully you get more consistent emergence and more consistent tuber size. Gibberellic acid, which I just talked about. Narrower row width, which Steve just talked about. So, do you consider going from 36 to 34-inch rows? There are several growers on the island that grow on 34-inch rows. Of course, there's also some people that have 30 inches for little potatoes, those sorts of things. So 36 doesn't have to be where you're at. And pre-cutting seed for varieties with strong apical dominance. So again, some of those same, lower stem varieties like Shepherdie, Prospect, maybe Dakota. How do we, is there an opportunity of doing some pre-cutting there to break some of that apical dominance and improve stem number? So does anybody have any questions on managing seed size before I keep rolling? Okay. Bruising and mechanical damage. I won't spend too much time on this because this should be mostly review for most of you. There is a fact sheet on the agronomy site that was based on some presentations that Steve Holland did here a few years ago, about 4 years ago this time of year, and where we did a cutter demo and a few things like that. So anyway, this fact sheet's up on the agronomy site. Some of the key points from that that I would note is, when it comes to set cutter maintenance and calibration, you can't just do it once at the beginning of the season and then, just leave her for the season. You're going to have to be constantly looking at those, looking at your cutter, making sure, taking samples frequently, of your seed profile to make sure the size is where you need it, making sure you're getting rid of these little pieces less than 1.5 ounce, making sure you're not making a lot of them in the first place. Keeping those knives sharp, hopefully not cutting off ends of plants and nipping off bud ends and that sort of stuff. Some other things, warming up your seed before cutting, so I know we talked a little bit about some varieties keeping the seed cool, but there is a benefit to having a little warmer temperature at cutting. It encourages suberization and getting that seed to heal, making it easier to cut so you're not getting jagged edges and shatter, bruise, and those sorts of things. Of course, avoiding drops, particularly for cut seed pieces. So an interesting piece of information I got recently was a drop of 6 inches onto a corner or an edge, onto sort of like, and by that I mean a cut edge on a seed piece. That'll cause bruising almost 100% of the time at 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So minimizing those drops as much as possible is going to improve the viability and the productivity of your seed. Of course, not cutting or storing seed in a storage that has previously had CIPC in it. That is a huge thing. If you don't have any other choice, making sure that building has been cleaned thoroughly, steam cleaned, hopefully multiple times. But CIPC residue can last for a long time and can be released in small amounts, and even those very small amounts can drag down yield on seed, and we've seen that through trials. Visibly removing diseased tubers before cutting. Of course, anything that you think you could spread through cutting, get rid of it. Using a registered fungicide seed treatment on cut seed. This has changed a little bit this year as the Mancozeb products are no longer available for seed treatment. So just to consider what you're using for your seed piece treatments. And then getting your cut seed dried back down to avoid soft rot decay. So getting it dried down, getting it superized, if using a drying agent if you need to make sure that you are getting your protectants on, but you're not creating a lot of free moisture that's going to accelerate decay. And a big part of this is making sure that your seed is properly ventilated and not stored super high. Allow lots of air to be able to move through that pile. Steve already talked a little bit about optimal seed piece size. So generally, many studies over many years have shown that larger seed piece size is associated with better yields, and that your cut seed pieces under 1.5 ounces will generally struggle to produce a viable plant. So they may emerge, they may not. Cut pieces between 1.5 and 2 ounces, they may establish and you may get a viable plant, but they generally are associated with a reduction in yield versus larger seed pieces. And consistently larger seed piece size may require you to adjust your in-row spacing. Steve kind of already addressed that a little bit. That's going to vary by variety, going to vary about how big your seed is, but that's something that you need to take into account. So this is another slide that was lent to me by Mark Pavick at Washington State University. And on this, you can see that they've planted rows with various sizes of seed pieces, of cut seed pieces. So starting at the left, we've got 1/2 ounce seed, 3/4 ounce seed, 1 1/4, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5. And you can see basically everything over 2 ounce is fully emerged and looking pretty healthy. But even there is a considerable visual difference between the 3 and 3.5 ounce and the 2 and the 2.5 ounce, right? It's quite a bit bushier, quite a bit greener. Everything to 1.5 ounce and down, you've got misses, you've got some more sickly looking plants and things that don't look quite as great. So definitely have some challenges. And down here under 1 ounce, we've got lots of misses. We've got lots of stuff that's not looking like it's going to make a viable crop. So with that, Mary Kay just walked in the room and just on time. And Mary Kay is going to give us a quick update on where we're at with the sort of the post-harvest test results and stuff from PEI for this last year. And then Jennifer from CFIA is going to give us an update on BRR.
Thank you. Thanks, Ryan. Good afternoon. Yes, so just good timing. I just walked in from another meeting, so that's great. Just want to start off just sort of talking about our seed acreage here on PEI. Our number of acres has been pretty stable for the last number of years. The last big uptick was in 2012 when seed supply was really short the year before. So we've been doing pretty well on our seed acreage. When you look at what we actually, of the seed acres we produce, the volume that actually gets used, like planted locally or exported as seed, it works out to about between 9 and 10,000 acres, just on a rough calculation. So we do have a bit of a buffer there. We use about, of the seed we produce, about 80% of that, of what we ship as seed is planted locally here on PEI, and the rest goes domestically or to the US or to export markets. So there's a little bit of a buffer for, you know, lots that perhaps don't pass the post-harvest test, for stuff that may be lost in storage, or stuff that seed that may be graded and have the top end graded out for table stock. However, as you'll see from the next slide, we definitely need that buffer in a year like this. Visual pass rates on PEI have always been very good, and you can, you know, continuing to the present day, even with the increase in you know, processing and fresh acreage that isn't certified. But, you know, we're in the high 90s as far as the visual pass rate goes. This year, you can see our number is a little bit lower, and that's primarily due to lots that were taken out due to disease issues like ring rot and potato wart. So we lost a little bit of extra acres this year. Our post-harvest pass rates have been pretty good. Our last really poor year, I would say, was in 2012. We had a lot of virus spread that year. But since then, our pass rates for the post-harvest test have been very good in the 80s. So our pass rates by acre, about 81% of our lots tested passed the post-harvest test this year. But of course, the question is, well, lot and acres might tell me a little bit more about volume. So if you look at like Russet Burbank, 76% passed by lot, but 84% passed by acre. Dakota Russet, same thing, 81% by lot, 90% by acreage. It can go the other way. Gold Rush, we had 55% passed by lot, but only 41% passed by acre. However, in most cases for the major varieties, the percentage passed is higher by acre than by lot this year. Looking ahead to the 2021 crop and the seed we have to plant, that, of course, the big impact this year was the drought in both New Brunswick and PEI, which drove down our yields, and that definitely is affecting our availability of seed. And everyone you talk to just kind of says, you know, there's seed around, but the supply is tight. There's not a whole lot of extra. Specific varieties will be experiencing a shortage as a result of decertification due to ring rot, and also some of our potato wart losses. That, again, those are pretty specific varieties and are going to affect specific markets. So there probably will be, even in the processing and fresh, there may be more juggling of different varieties this year, or substituting. You might have thought you were going to plant one variety and you have to substitute in another variety just based on seed availability. We do maintain a page on our potato wart website that people can call in and list seed lots that they still have available for sale. So you can check that out on our website under the seed availability listing. And I know there are some seed lots up there right now. Jennifer is on the line, I believe, and she is going to present a few slides. We have not experienced a big incidences with bacterial ring rot for a number of years. So we just thought it would be good just to refresh people's memory on when bacterial ring rot happens, what is the process that CFIA follows in their investigative procedure. Oh, sorry. So are you there, Jennifer?
Yes, I am. Hi.
Okay, super. Your slides are up, and I guess you can see them, so you just tell us when to forward.
Oh, okay. No, I can't actually see
okay,
them.
He's just going to share them now. There we go. Okay, can you see that?
Yes. Great.
Okay, Ryan will adjust them when you indicate. So
okay, thank you. Okay, so I am Jennifer Cameron with CFIA. I'm the Regional Program Officer for Plant Protection and Seed Potato. So when we get these detections of regulated pests, I do a lot of the coordination of the CFIA response. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about bacterial ring rot, specifically our investigation procedures and the follow-up that happens after it's detected on a farm. So the current name for bacterial ring rot is Clavibacter cepidonicus. The name has changed a number of times over the years. It's a regulated non-quarantine pest of potatoes. So when it's found, we don't take action as far as quarantining locations, but we do decertify seed because it is under the Seeds Act and regulations. There's zero tolerance for BRR within the seed potato system. Next slide. BRR is generally detected through lab tests. It hasn't been detected visually for a number of years. So it's usually through the routine testing of seed potato lots at the CFIA accredited labs. When they get a suspect positive at the private labs, they will then send the sample over to the CFIA lab in Charlottetown for confirmation. If CFIA confirms that it is in fact a positive for BRR, they will inform regional operations. So that's me and the local office. In that case, a CFIA inspector will inform the farm, and I will revoke the growing crop certificate, meaning that all seed lots on the farm will be decertified. Or if it happens earlier in the season before the growing crop certificate has been issued, the field reports will indicate that BRR was detected on the farm and the growing crop certificate will not be issued. Next slide. So once we start a BRR investigation, there are two main branches, two main things that we're looking at. So the first is to determine the extent of the infection on the farm with the positive lot. See if there's been any on-farm spread, because the first lot that we detected may not be the origin of the BRR on that farm. And the second main branch is to determine whether the infection might have come from the seed source. So in that case, we look to see whether there are any sister lots, so any other lots planted with that same seed source on any farms in Canada, and we will test those lots. If there's no sister lots available, we'll go back to the seed source farm, and I'll talk about that a little bit more coming up. Next slide. So this is a bit of a diagram, a flow chart of what happens to illustrate it. So if we have the positive lot, it shows the two main directions we go in, one of which is testing all lots on the farm and on any connected farms. So if there was any sharing of equipment or storages, those farms are considered infected as well, and we need to test all lots on those farms, and they will be decertified as well. The other direction is looking at the seed source. So as I said, we will test any other sister lots with the same seed source, and that depending on the seed source, there could be quite a few of those, or there may be only one or two. And if there are none available, that's when we need to go back to the farm that produced that seed source, and we test all lots on that farm, because at that point, the original seed source is no longer available. We need to test everything that's currently on the farm to make sure that BRR is not there. Next slide. And this illustrates what happens if we do test the sister lots and we find out that we have positives of the same sister lot on multiple farms, in that case, that prompts us to go back and look at the seed source farm as well, because you have a positive lot on farm A, a positive lot on farm B, both from the same seed source. That is a strong indication that that seed source might be where the infection is coming from. And so in that case, we go back and test all lots on the seed source farm. And we continue doing this. Every time we get a positive lot, we follow through the same steps again until we try to narrow down where that infection may have come from. Next slide. So there's a few things that can complicate a BRR investigation. The first one I've already mentioned is when there's no sister lots available, and that's when we need to go test all the lots on a seed source farm, and that can end up being a lot of lots in some cases. Also the time of year when BRR is detected. If it happens in the late fall, early winter after harvest, usually most of the lots are available and we can test efficiently at that point. But if it happens in very late spring or early summer, when the crop has already been planted, we cannot do any tests until it has reached maturity. And so we have to wait. And if it's found in late winter or early spring, you may run into situations where a grower has already shipped some of the seed from the positive farm. And so that would lead us to those farms where that's been shipped to. It could have been exported, which would mean we'd have to inform trading partners and that sort of thing. And then there's also the connected farm units, which I already mentioned. If clear separation can't be demonstrated, meaning that you can show that there's been cleaning and disinfection every time equipment has moved between farm units, then all connected farms will be implicated in the BRR investigation. Next slide. Once a grower has been informed that BRR has been detected on their farm and the seed lots have all been decertified, a number of things need to happen if that grower wishes to re-enter the seed potato system. If they don't wish to re-enter the seed potato system, that is fine, and it's then outside of CFIA's jurisdiction. We only take action on BRR within the seed potato system. So first of all, of course, all the premises and equipment must be cleaned and disinfected under CFIA supervision, and this must be done before receiving any new seed onto the farm. Secondly, the fields that were used to produce the positive lots must be maintained free of volunteer potatoes for 2 years. And we will monitor this and track it and make sure that those fields are clear of volunteers for 2 years before they can be used again within a seed farm. Next slide. Then for the first 3 years, all seed lots on the farm must be tested under the intensified sampling regime. This basically means all lots will be tested at the 1,000 tuber rate. And this is done partially at the CFIA lab, and CFIA covers part of the cost for that. For the following 3 years, that's years 4, 5, and 6, seed lots are tested under the normal sampling regime, but it still must be samples collected under CFIA supervision. And also for those first 3 years, the farm unit cannot sell pre-elite, elite 1, or elite to seed. We will not issue seed tags or records of bulk movement for those classes from a farm that's had BRR within the past 3 years. And I'm talking about CFIA's response to this. Of course, the province has their own regulations and their own follow-up that they do, and they take action outside of the seed potato system. So following the detection, they'll be doing their own procedures, and we collaborate with them on that, especially on the C&D side. Next slide. I just wanted to mention a few good biosecurity practices and requirements. So first one is to clean everything that enters the farm unit. The way the CFIA seed potato program is set up is that everything that is on a seed potato farm has been cleaned and disinfected. So if you're bringing in any used equipment, any shared equipment, it needs to be cleaned and disinfected when it comes onto the farm. If there is any sharing of equipment, as I said, it needs to be thoroughly cleaned and disinfected between farm units, and that needs to be documented very well, so that if there is a case of BRR, you can have proof for your CFIA inspector that that was done in between the farms. And all lots on connected farm units will be implicated in a BRR investigation unless there's very good evidence that no shared equipment was used. And part of that is making sure that things are declared properly on applications. It's very important to make sure that there are no lots on the farm that are not on the application, and that there are no lots on the application that aren't actually on the farm. And that's something that our inspectors are going to be stressing more going forward. Next slide. These are the CFIA policies that are in place for this. If you're interested in further reading, we do have a policy specifically on the investigation procedure after BRR has been detected on a farm. We have the D9712, which is the testing program for field grown seed potatoes. So that's the general testing program. And the seed potato inspection manual, PI 005, has a lot of good information in it as well about what needs to be in place as far as BRR requirements before submitting an application for seed inspection. Next slide. That's all I had. If there's any questions, I can try to answer them.
Thanks, Jennifer. I don't know if anyone has any questions. Like, as I mentioned, this was just it's been a number of years since any of us dealt with BRR infection. So we just wanted to provide a bit of a review on what the process is and why different seed lots or different farms were being tested as part of the investigation. If there's no specific questions on the ring rot investigation, I guess, Jennifer, we would just ask if you would make a comment or two on the status of the potato wart investigation that's also been going on this winter.
Sure. So in the fall, we had the detection of potato wart. We did our full trace out investigation. So trace forward of what moved off the farm, trace back of where things came from onto the farm. And from that, we completed soil sampling of all the associated fields. The testing has all been done on that at our lab, and potato wart was not detected in any additional fields. We will be continuing to work with that farm going forward and continuing with our monitoring and surveillance as we do for all the other fields under the potato wart domestic long-term management plan. And there is research work ongoing at our lab on that latest case, looking at trying to determine pathotype and susceptibility to various varieties and that kind of thing for our work going forward.
Thank you. There's been, as you know, there's been ongoing meetings between CFIA and USDA APHIS, and we were hoping we would hear today or tomorrow a response from APHIS on trade resumption. I don't know if anyone has any questions for Jennifer, or Greg is in the room as well. For we've been updated on a very regular basis by CFIA. We still have a lot of questions going forward, and there will be, you know, work on the long-term management plan and the pest risk assessment with CFIA going ahead. But I guess that's where things are right now. The investigation's been completed. The discussions basically with USDA have been completed to date, and we're awaiting, like, say, a response, hoping for today or tomorrow, where we'll see a resumption of trade. And that's the status right now. If anyone has any questions, we'd be happy to answer if there's anything further as best we can. And if not, thanks very much, Jennifer. We appreciate the update, and hopefully this will be 1 year. This kind of year doesn't happen again for a long time. It's been a lot of issues to deal with between COVID and disease issues and the drought and all kinds of stuff we've had to put up with in 2020. And I don't think we're looking to see a year like that again for a long, long time. So just to round things off, we just, again, a lot of this material will be just a review for a lot of people, just to talk a little bit about cleaning and disinfection. It's something that we all do. Sometimes, again, if we're not dealing with a disease issue for a number of years, sometimes there's little things that maybe get dropped off or don't get as much attention paid to them. And then something like a year like this is just an extra incentive or a reminder that all these are little things that need to be done. So just basically talking about cleaning and disinfection, what to clean, when, how, what products can we use, biosecurity policy and practices, and resources that are available. Oops, how do I go back, Ryan? Okay, so what to clean? Basically, we're doing as thorough cleanup and disinfection of our facilities as we can, including storage facilities, boxes we use for storing seed, machinery, and trucks that are moving seed and potatoes around during the year. This was a table that was prepared by Dr. Ron Howard from Alberta. I think he's recently retired from the research station out in Alberta, but he had put together different materials. Sorry? I just need the pointer for a second. Okay, sorry. Okay, sorry. He'd put together just a list of some different materials and different machinery and facilities that we would be disinfecting, and just noting whether they're easy to disinfect, difficult to disinfect, depending on the material they're made out of, the number of fissures, cracks that may be available for the pathogen to hide in. And you know, even certain machinery, whether there's certain spots that are hard to get at with your spray and your disinfection. So again, just a little table. When to clean. Generally, it's an ongoing process through the year, but there are certain critical times. Facility cleanup in the summer, we're getting a break between crops. It's a good opportunity to give everything a good cleanup and disinfection. And again, you're getting most of your potatoes hopefully have been shipped off the farm, so you're getting a break between the crops. This used to be mandated in the seed regulations, and I don't think it's mandated anymore. It's basically left up to a grower, best management practices. Second key time is when you're moving seed. I know we had a seed growers meeting a while ago, and some of the growers were saying they were, some of their customers were sending trucks to pick up their seed that still had like potatoes left from a load of maybe fresh or something else in the bottom of the truck. So again, if you're spending the money for good seed, before you're sending a truck for seed, make sure that it's well cleaned out, and either make the arrangement with the grower that you're going to disinfect it, or it'll be clean, but they'll spray it with disinfectant at the seed farm. And it is a requirement of the seed regulations that when you're moving seed, that the truck has to be disinfected. Another key time is after you've got your seed home and you're getting ready for planting. So to disinfect your seed cutter and the area around it in between seed lots. I know Ryan showed equipment earlier on where someone was spraying disinfectant at regular intervals during the seed cutting process, which helps. But organic material kind of inactivates the disinfectant. And when you're cutting seed, you can get like flesh of the tubers and juice built up on the blades. So it's good when you're getting in between seed lots to give that equipment a thorough disinfection, get all that stuff rinsed off and disinfected before you start the next lot. And then obviously when moving between farms is a time, again, we talked about, seed trucks, but also just if you're traveling between farms, having visitors to your farm. So when cleaning and disinfecting are a package deal, as I said, organic matter inactivates the disinfectant. So you really have to make sure that whatever you're putting disinfectant on is good and clean before you start. So the first stage obviously is removal of visible soil and plant debris. That's pretty easy to do. The next stage is sort of the fine cleaning, hose off with a power washer, using detergent if necessary to clean off any stuck on dirt, or I think Ryan talked about before, the bacterial slime, which can really hold the bacterial ring rot organism on a piece of machinery or a pallet box or the side of a storage or something, and to get into the cracks and hard to reach places. And then a thorough application of your disinfectant product. A lot of the labels, read your label, but a lot of the labels will say 10 minutes, but really 20 minutes is going to help you make sure it's disinfected. And if there is any bacterial slime left on, it gives it time for the product to break down that biofilm. So the recommended really is to keep the material wet for 20 minutes. And it may, especially in the summertime or something, if you have pallet boxes outside, you may have to spray them more than one time. On PEI, what products we can use? We have general storage disinfectant, Sanidate, Storax, and I mean long industrial bleach, which is a good disinfectant. You have to look at the label, the corrosiveness, something like bleach is quite a corrosive product, so you have to be careful when you're handling it. And again, go by the label rates and the label directions for applying these products, but they can mainly all be used for sprays and for foot dips and things like that. Visitors to the farm and moving from farm to farm. When we had a bacterial ring rot webinar last week with CPC, and I mean, one of the questions on it was how useful are foot baths? You're telling us the disinfectant has to be on for 10 or 20 minutes. Well, obviously you're not soaking your feet for 20 minutes when you're just dipping them in a foot bath. But really the cleaning is what is key. When you're disinfecting, if you make sure that your boots are clean, scraping off any loose soil, and the disinfectant is an extra, but the real key is making sure that your boots are clean. And if you have the opportunity to provide alternate farm footwear, the little booties, plastic booties or whatever, if you have visitors to your farm. And as I mentioned, disinfectant will not sterilize soil and organic debris that may be on your boots. Vehicles, again, hosing off or pressure washing loose soil from the wheels and wheel wells when moving from farm to farm, spraying the wheels with disinfectant. you know, if you have the opportunity when you're visiting a farm to park on the road, not to drive into the field if you don't have to. And again, depending on who it is, if you have the opportunity to transport your visitors around in a regular farm vehicle, that's beneficial as well. This, the National Farm Level Biosecurity Standard for potato growers was developed several years ago between the CFIA and the Canadian Potato Council. It's got some good guidelines in there just for looking at your farm as a whole and indicating areas where there may be threats or areas you may want to pay additional attention to with regards to biosecurity and disinfecting and visitors and that whole thing. We have copies here at the Potato Board if anybody wants to contact us to get a copy, and it is also available online. And you can, they say if you just Google potato biosecurity, this is your #1 result that will come up. Also, several years ago when the province was getting out of the truck disinfection business, we had several workshops around the province and we videotaped them. So there's three sections on four sections on YouTube looking at different aspects of cleaning and disinfecting. Dave McSwain talks about the process. Sulky DeBoer talks about the actual disease organisms, and Ken Lindley talked about some of the equipment. And I know many of you have on your farm a spray disinfection unit or a mobile unit that you can take around to different places on your farm and use for your boxes and machinery and facilities. But these are available if anyone wants to go onto YouTube, search for PI Potato Research and click on playlists, and you'll be able to find the videos there. And again, I know, like, we were at a workshop the other day and said, you know, maybe you yourself are well up to date, but maybe you have new staff on who, you know, aren't aware of your farm's biosecurity protocols or even the importance of cleaning and disinfection. So this, you know, this may be an opportunity for some of your new staff to watch these videos and just be up to speed with what's important on your farm. And like I said, there's been ring rot cases, not just in PEI, but across the country in the last number of years in different provinces. So it seems to be, you know, raising its head a little bit more. And I guess, like I said, it's pretty easy when you're not dealing with a problem for a long time. It sort of falls down your level of priorities. So this is kind of a reminder that it needs to be right up there, the regular cleaning and disinfection. So the Canadian Potato Council prepared a webinar that was on March 2nd, and the video link is available on the PEI Potato Agronomy site. So it takes about, how long was it, Ryan? About an hour? It's about an hour. And again, it goes over some of the stuff we did here in a little bit more detail about cleaning and disinfection and about the disease in general. So again, it's just another resource for you. And that's it.